right, this is a really special episode, but it also requires a little more explanation than usual. Followers of the newsletter will know that Rachelle and I went to Europe for the end of our respective book tours. We first visited London, where Rachelle read at the Third Man Records location there. Then we both read in Berlin and in Paris, and we closed out the trip in Dortmund, Germany, which is Buffalo's sister city. There we put on a performance together, along with some of our friends there, that was incredibly special and is something that will never be repeated. Luckily, Bertolt Spruch, my Deutsche Vater, captured all of it on video, or almost all of it, and that's what's going to be in this podcast episode. The performance, though, didn't have the benefit of any explanation. We just went straight into it. It was kind of in a kind of performance art attitude. So I do think that you listeners of the podcast deserve a little bit of a précis here. So Dortmund, as I said, is Buffalo's sister city, and my uncle Andy Topolski is actually part of the story of how that came to be. He was in a group show of Buffalo artists that visited Dortmund. It was called Begegnung mit Buffalo, or Happenings in Buffalo, in 1976. And the next year, Buffalo and Dortmund officially became sister cities. Andy Topolski would come back to the Museum Ostwall in Dortmund to exhibit in 1996 for a solo show. And I wouldn't get there until 2012. If you've read the book, you know I wasn't aware that I was walking in Andy's footsteps. So when we returned to the Museum Ostwall, we decided to do more than just a typical reading or a film screening. I did read from the book, and that's what you'll hear. We also screened the film, and I'm not going to include all of that in the podcast. If you haven't seen the film already, you can stream it on Amazon Prime Video. But we cut from the film twice so that I could do live interviews with two really important people to the book. Now, as I said, there were no introductions in any of this. We just cut from the film, lights went up, boom, and I was talking to somebody. So they didn't get proper introductions. I will introduce them now in the context of the podcast. The first person you'll hear from is Peter Meyer. He's an artist who was based in Peiting, Bavaria, and met Andy at the Busch-Reisinger Museum, which is part of the Harvard Art Museums, sometime in the late 80s or early 90s. And he became great friends with both Andy and Cindy. He helped Andy's work get seen. He helped install a major commission of Andy's in Leipzig, Germany. And then he also stayed with them at their apartment in Brooklyn many, many, many times when he was visiting the States. The second person I interview, also a really special friend of theirs, Christel Schüppenhauer. She was a gallerist in Cologne, Germany for many years, and she exhibited both Andy and Cindy. She did a solo show for Andy, but she included both Andy and Cindy in a group show called Auteur de Kolar Collage, which was in honor of the Czech collage artist Jiří Kolar. This is really a special moment because it was probably the pinnacle of Cindy's career exhibiting her work. You know, she was with so many celebrated artists. It was a really well-received show. She was in a great context, and it was her first show abroad. This was in 1990. But it was actually the last show she would have until just a couple weeks ago, when the Western New York Book Arts Center here in Buffalo put on a solo show of her late work called Cindy Suffoletto. That was really special, but that was a 35-year, 36-year almost gap. So I got to interview Christel as well and talk about what drew her to Andy and Cindy's work. The film finished out, and then there was a musical portion of the night. That also did get an introduction, but the introduction was in German, so I'll explain it in English. Andy's work was intermedia. That was the term he used. You could also call it fluxus, or a part of the fluxus movement. He moved between forms, and many of his works did not sit in just one media. So works on paper might involve poetry, or they could be read as a score of music. In this case, he had a work he called Navigator, which was a musical piece, a composition that took the dates of the founding of different cities and towns in the Western New York region, transformed those dates into musical notes, and then plotted those on a score such that the history of the region could be played as a score. This was also connected to the thinking that went into his submission for the Buffalo-Niagara International Airport Concourse Commission, which was a major moment in his career. This had only been performed a couple of times, and only by small wind ensembles. Once by the SEM ensemble, led by Peter Kotek, and once by Andy's friend Don Metz here in Buffalo. There may have been a couple other performances, but this wasn't, widely accessible. It's certainly not accessible like streaming, for example, now. So we gave this composition, Andy's original notes, to our friends who are musicians in Germany, Matthias Spruck and Sebastian Lindecke. They have a band called Dammnation, and this is not just a wind ensemble, though. This is a jazz band, large jazz band, I think 9-piece. And they got help from our other friend, Peter de Köcke, who interpreted the score and made it possible to play it for a larger ensemble with different types of instruments. And they performed it in Dortmund. This would have been for the first time in many decades, which was just so incredible. But they went a step further. They actually took Andy's concept and applied it to the Rhine-Ruhr region, or the Ruhrgebiet region of Germany, which would be sort of like the equivalent of our Western New York, although somewhat larger. And instead of Cheektowaga and Lackawanna and Lancaster, they took Bochum and Essen and Cologne and Dortmund. And they extended Andy's ideas, into this German region. So they played 2 pieces, and over this, or with this, Rachelle read a poem, Conte Partiro, from Herbrugh Hellier, which we all thought paired really beautifully with Navigator and with the night in general. And then we were having such a good time that the band just kept on jamming. So that's what you're going to hear. The beginning of the film cuts out just the start of my reading, so I'll read the first couple sentences of the book now, and that will take you into the performance. She lets him help her move the armchair from its spot against the pale plaster wall. Really, Cindy does the lifting, tugging, stutter-stepping to clear a space. Opposite, the upholstery sags, straining beneath his fingers. When she moves to lift the framed drawing from the wall, then inch out the nail that held it, he rests, laying his palms flat against the chair's faded arms. Still and splayed like this, his hands look white, like enormous summer moths. 4 months ago, Andy had been built like a laborer, eating well and breathing mountain air, putting in shifts at his studio beside their home in Callicoon, a hamlet tucked in the Catskills. He lifted bricks and stones for sculptures, practiced joinery with heavy beams meant for dining sets that friends and neighbors had commissioned. But now, back in the city for appointments with specialists, stairs dizzy him. Elevators give him vertigo. Small talk leaves him breathless. Budweiser still sits well, but even simple foods, favorite foods, can leave him nauseous. Cindy manages. She manages the double-mortgaged house in Callicoon, the dark rented apartment on Withers Street in North Williamsburg. She manages the correspondence, friends checking in and galleries from Buffalo to Basel inquiring. And she manages the hospitals. With weathered eyes and wiry hair from her own second round of chemo completed in the fall, Cindy knows the hospitals, knows the right people at Herbert Irving and Weill Cornell and Columbia. She knows all the sallow hallways, the exits, and the dead ends. For 20 years, Cindy has managed for the both of them. She has managed Andy and Andy's career, the recognition received for his beautiful, precise, complicated, recognize-it-anywhere art. She took pride in it until, one day, pride was an indulgence that exhaustion wouldn't afford her. And now this. Now Andy needs her more than ever, and in new, rewardless ways. They are alone in love and knowledge of each other. Cindy manages because she must, for the both of them. But with them, it has never been just about surviving. They learned to be alone together first inside ideas. The purple t-shirt hangs loosely from Andy's shoulders. His shrinking body is a factory of bones, new protuberances emerging from him every day. His own unfamiliarity makes the shirt difficult to remove. Cindy steps to him, her small hands finding the hem hanging blousily where his stomach used to be. He looks away as she lifts, letting his arms drop and loping to the tripod as soon as he's free. He fiddles with the camera, an old Polaroid, the same one that has been with him all these years. Funny, he earned his MFA in photography and came up in the world with a group the critics called the Pictures Generation. He had been a leader among them, the far-out one, the star to catch, once. But when the coffee table books were finally written, Andy was relegated to the appendix. The reason was simple. Andy stopped making pictures. For a period of years, he stopped making art altogether. But now pictures are all he can talk about. The surface, Andy says, speaking to himself, staring through the viewfinder to the open wall. A loaded gun. When he sways, it feels like the room moves with him. She thinks he's paler than the walls. Under the brutal shop lamp, his bruises glow like bar signs. Outside, snow falls, and music fills the street when a car door opens. No one. Alicia Keys, one of the first hits of the new year. Cindy starts to hum along, but as soon as she begins, the song is gone. A little more, Andy says, his rumble now a rasp. Cindy tugs the chair another inch, then straightens up. Still bare from the hips, holding his waistband with one hooked hand, he shuffles into the light. Cindy sees it now, where the blank wall ends and the canvas begins. When he turns, he doesn't look into the camera. He looks to her. Their eyes shine like a river in the moonlight. Wait, he says, straightens his body to the camera. It is a minor struggle even to lift his own chin, to face, in a way, his own gaze. The cheeks behind his beard slacken, eyes go hard. Maybe this is it. The voice, his or hers, is lost inside the click.
We met earlier at this Busch Reisinger opening, and he started asking me questions about Germany history. He was very interested, and so we had a nice talk about that. He even asked me for my work, and so we showed each other drawings and pieces. Some of them I saw earlier. So I was a little familiar with Andy's work before, but I didn't know him for real.
Yeah. Could you tell me a little more about that intellectual and creative connection that you had with Andy and Cindy? Were you interested in exploring similar ideas at the time?
He was at this moment at Peter Moscato's. Cindy was there too, so I met her the first time. And I remember they were very, very open, and in fact we were immediately deep into history, art history things, and even techniques and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Over the years, as your friendship developed, you helped each other out a lot. You know, I know that maybe sometimes you stayed with Andy and Cindy in New York, and you know, the logistics of New York they were able to help you with. You also helped Andy tremendously here in Germany, both with trying to track down art that was missing in some cases, and also with a commission that he won in Leipzig, which was very complicated. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the importance of that kind of support for an artist, especially an artist like you were and like Andy was, trying to get your work in front of an audience overseas.
I think I start with the Leipzig project. I spent about 20 times in Leipzig for that, to support his installation, which, for my opinion, it was very, very necessary. I mean, the international connection the sense of international
sort of exchange.
being seen. Einfach. Sorry.
You can say it in German if you want. They'll all understand.
Ja, wenn ich warten müsste. No, I'm sorry. It's,
Well, this idea of exchange, being visible on both sides, maybe.
being visible, that was the word. Being visible, and he showed me how to make paper pulp, which was very easy. He watched me once in my hometown Peiting when he visited me how to make paper pulp, which I used for my work as well, and things like that. And for the Leipzig thing, I started like in German, Bauleitung. Like this, I started learning bautechnisches English.
Someone will fill me in later on, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, it sounds like artists, to get anything done, need a lot of help from their families and friends and gallerists and collectors, but artists also need help from each other, you know?
Yeah, for sure. That was our thing. So I helped him to put works to Prague for an exhibition. I organized in my hometown in a small museum an exhibition with works of him, which I put together from Basel and different galleries in Germany. And our friendship grew and grew. In time, I spent more than 20 times at his place. I lived in this with Cindy and Andy, and Cindy was not able to come to Europe, but Andy stayed about up to 5 times at my place, and so we. Well,
and I know that, speaking of your place, you live with some works by Andy in your house, right? You were kind enough to show me some pictures of that. I wonder how you think about the artwork by Andy and by Cindy today. Obviously, you think it's worth hanging on your own walls, but how should the broader art world think about it?
I think it's necessary to show them, to show their works. They're so up to date. I mean, they're so filled with information about political developments. As I remember, Andy was so shocked about 9/11. After that, he was not able to work for a month and maybe a year. So at this time, we met many times. I spent the one day before 9/11 happened, I started back to Germany, so I was very close. And 2 weeks later, I was back in Brooklyn at Andy's place again. And so it was very, I was very close to the whole thing. And Andy was so shocked, and that showed me he was deeply impressed by Weltgeschehen.
Yeah, definitely. I think the work is politically relevant to us.
And das hat auch verarbeitet, ständig. Musik, Literatur und aktuelles Weltgeschehen.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Peter Meyer.
I'm so sorry.
No, you did a great job. In New York or in?
No. I can't remember the name. And so we are work together to do shows, and as well with Gallery Fonnetant from Berlin, and you are from Berlin, and So she was the first gallery for Andy, I think, in this time. And I was working on a show about concrete and visual poetry. The name was Wortlaut in Cologne, and I was collecting some new artists for this idea. What is concrete poetry and what is Fluxus, and the relationships between these parts. And we did a catalog, and so I invited Andy for this show, and Andy showed me sometimes in his studio. He showed me the work by Cindy, and I was really surprised about her work because it was. In this time, that was what I saw. It was concrete poetry or visual poetry, and so I invited her in 1990 for a show I did for Jerzy Collage. I worked together with all this Czechoslovakian artists as well, with the husband of Köcke.
Peter Köcke,
Peter, the father of Peter Köcke.
Yeah.
I worked with him and learned to know Peter Köcke. And my gallery was working with artists like Andy, with other artists who did art and music, like Cage. And so that was why I loved his work from the beginning.
You mentioned concrete poetry and Fluxus. I wondered if you could expand a little bit more on what was really interesting and exciting to you as a gallerist in that period in the late 80s.
What was for me, what was important for me.
Yes,
yes. And this it was this intermedia aspect. The artists are working as a writer, as a painter, or as a musician, and the ballet. It's all the same for me. And it's coming. It is coming together, and with Andy, with his scores he used for his paintings, and he was working I think it was in the 70s. He was working with Peter Köcke with his SEM ensemble for new music, and he was a musician as well, Andy, and that was very interesting for me to see an artist, a new artist. I didn't know him before, and then who is working with this really strong and new elements. I think his work today, is very actual. If you look in the new art, new artists who are working in sculptures or so, they are using the same things as Andy, and his sculptures are really between music and politics and art and poetic. This all is was coming together in his work.
We heard in the film Eric Siegeltuck, the gallerist you mentioned, note that he came to see Andy's work. He knew that Cindy was working, but he just didn't pay enough attention to it. And that was something I heard from many, many, many gallerists and curators as I researched this book. You are a very notable exception to that. And I would say that maybe the only other exception was Charlotte Critique. Both of you noticed Cindy and chose to exhibit Cindy. I wonder if you could talk about that decision, both what interested you in her work, but maybe also why so many overlooked her.
And Cindy, it was the collage she did, and the title of the show I did for Jerzy Collage was Collage, Collage. Autour de collage, collage. And I took the works from Cindy in the show in 1990. Between all the other Schwitters and all these guys who did collage, or girls.
Yeah. I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit more about why so many others did overlook her, whereas you recognized, and then put her in a show with many artists who were much more famous at the time.
Yeah. But it was in 1990, and in the next show, I think I tried to get her in other shows, but it doesn't work because she was not known for curators, or there wasn't curators for the Gallerist, and so it was not so successful to put her work in other shows. Or to in shows for colleagues or museums or so.
Cindy and Andy both passed away quite young. The film will get more into that in a moment. Many of their contemporary artists had more years, in some cases at this point more decades. They're still making art. I wonder if you could speak to how today we might think about the art that Andy and Cindy made. Knowing that they didn't have a couple more decades, they're not making art right now. The body of work they did leave behind, how should we think about that?
Yes, I think the art of Andy, it's very actual in this time. And Cindy is a complete other part of art. And in the moment, I think it's a little bit better as many years before for this sensibility. The people don't have an eye. Today, the art is a little bit more pushed and faster.
Yeah.
Not with this background and with this very sensitive combinations.
Good. Well, Christel Schüppenhauer, thank you very much. I break into movement when the old woman across from me flicks a strong, blunted finger in my direction. It is a command, not a suggestion. I help myself to another serving of cavatappi and blush sauce from the bowl at the center of the table. We sit on a poured concrete balcony of a brutalist apartment complex in the Scharnhorst district of Dortmund, Germany. It is early August 2014, and my best friend, Steve Coffett, and I are visiting Germany for the second time. We don't speak the language and are completely dependent on our host and guide, Matthias Spruck. Dortmund feels to us the way a favorite childhood campground might have felt. Like waking into a lucid dream every time we return to it. And the Sprucks and Matthias's best friend, Sebastian, are by now our extended family. Steve and I met Matthias in 2010. He'd been an exchange student during our senior year of high school and had fallen in quickly with our circle of eccentrics. The night before he left, we all went out for burgers. Matthias and me and Steve, our girlfriends, Neil, Claire, a few others from the orbit, and returned to my house to spend a few hours pulling up Vine compilations and deep-cut skits from the early days of YouTube on the TV in the living room. At the end of the night, Matthias embraced us, smelling of the cigarettes he snuck in the driveway after my parents had retreated upstairs, and insisted that we visit him for his 18th birthday the following summer. We had no intention of taking him up on this offer, but after nearly a year had passed, as we approached our first summer as college students, we better appreciated just how rare of an opportunity Matthias had offered us. After a gut check with Steve, I opened the Facebook Messenger chat where we periodically lobbed old jokes across time zones, and we told Matthias we were taking him up on it. We made our first trip in July 2012, 2 months after Cindy died and just 2 weeks after Steve's father had been killed in a shocking accident while biking to work one morning. We were grieving, ragged, on strained terms with family, on worse terms with our girlfriends. We came close to calling it off, but instead doubled down. I packed a fresh leather-bound journal for my first trip outside the country. Steve's mother packed him 72 protein bars. And Matthias was prepared with Hansa pills, pouch tobacco, and patience. The experience proved an emotional vortex for all three of us, and we emerged from it more like brothers than friends, promising a return as soon as it was possible. We do, 2 years later, and the Spruks, Matthias, his sister Sarah Maria, his brother Tobias, his mother and father, Brigitta and Bertold, greet us like family. So much so that our familial obligations include several social visits to Matthias's extended relatives, an honor and a happy requirement. 85-year-old Oma Michalski, the woman slowly immobilizing me with pasta on the balcony of her apartment, had, like Matthias's parents, escaped from the Silesian region of Soviet Poland in the 80s and became an adopted grandmother to the family. When she opens the door for us, I see that she resembles her apartment, compact and orderly. She disappears in a kind of camouflage, a floral dress moving against intersecting panes of floral wallpaper. Decorations hang head high for her, for me at about my shoulders, and consist mostly of Polish Catholic iconography and portraits of family members that I gather are no longer with us. Once she seated us on the balcony outside, tree-shaded and open just enough to the afternoon's warm breezes, she begins a bombardment of questions in German, smiling the whole time at Steve and me, looking not once at Matthias. Our friend sighs, spins his fork in his fingers, and rests it on the edge of his dish. He realizes that he'll have to spend the next hour eating with strategic intent and clinical precision, fitting mouthfuls between translations. He takes another breath and then explains to us in English that Oma Michalski wants us to tell her about our visit the previous day to the Museum Ostwall, the region's premier collection of postmodern and contemporary art. I can express the simplest sentiments in a plodding German by now, but I decide to spare us all the embarrassment and aim to deliver an abbreviated review in English, which would be easy enough for Matthias to translate. I have never seen such brazen fraud, I say. Oma Michalski nods, understanding completely, even before Matthias begins his loose interpretation. The largest exhibition space in the Museum Ostwall had featured a floor covered in metal spoons with 2 empty suitcases standing on one end and a sad-looking gray couch on the other. A sign on the wall indicated that one was supposed to pick up a suitcase, walk with it across the spoon pool, and then sit on the couch to contemplate the experience. Steve, Matthias, and I hadn't taken more than a few steps into the room. Some tacit understanding passed among us, and we moved on without participating. Other rooms held a pile of empty potato sacks, a red square canvas next to a blue square canvas, globes of LED lights reminiscent of a Michaels end-of-season sale, and a video of the artist Freya Hattenberger performing lackluster fellatio on a plastic-wrapped microphone. Dead-footed and depressed after this parade of smug banality, we turned a corner into a room loud with dream and gesture. All at once and in the same small space, we encountered evocative Picassos and brilliant Beckmans, an onslaught of emotion that coursed us physically. We turned and turned and turned and took in more and more. Best was August Mack's heartbreaking Great Zoological Garden, a triptych giving the impression of 100 bright panes of colored glass falling through the air, arrested at the moment of our noticing to take the shape of the image the title suggests, and threatening to collapse at a blink. These were works of the highest order, immortal, awesome. We knew immediately, and we knew it together, without speaking, knew it in every organ. We might have lingered half an hour before moving on. Turning another corner, we found a framed piece of paper reading, "Form is void, void is form." On a nearby wall was a larger canvas with a faded word in black airbrush, "Zerstört," destroyed, and superimposed above that, written in a loopy felt-tipped marker, "Alles ist Kunst," everything is art. And so on, and so on. We would not feel really alive again for the rest of our time in the gallery. Marketing text on the museum website sought to contextualize the collection. Anyone can have an idea. This became a joke, a rejoinder that we kept repeating to each other for the rest of the night, as we tried to purge the experience of the museum with the only medicine for bad art, schnapps and laughter. Ideas are not art, I say to Oma Michalski, with earnest conviction, at least equal to the museum's web copy. Ideas are boring. Ein Gedanke ist keine Kunst, Matthias translates for me. He picks at his cooling plate of pasta, bored in turn with the effort. Ideen, Scheiße, he says. Oma slaps his hand and clucks. But she understands and tells Matthias to start translating again. She wants to share a story about the Museum Ostwall. All three of us watch her face as she begins speaking in a hushing Schlesisch dialect, warm and crackling like a well-worn record. Many years ago, she says, the curators had exhibited a canvas, unmarked except for a grease stain in the corner. The canvas was not covered by glass, and one night a custodian noticed the stain, removed the work from the wall, and used an industrial cleaner to lift the grease from the canvas. She put it back, as blank as the day it had been stretched. Oma doesn't mention how long it had taken the professional staff to notice and investigate, but eventually they did, identified the well-intentioned culprit, and terminated her. Fact or apocryphon, the lesson of the story is obvious. Since the last war, contemporary art has been a playground for elites, and its products and play acting have been divorced from the root of all true art, which is feeling. 21 years old, embarking on a new season of life in Europe and working the American air out of my lungs, often in gusty pronouncements like this, I was perfectly confident passing judgments in a discipline I hadn't studied. And why not? Wasn't the janitor just as sure? But for whose benefit did I take up these positions? There was an air of performance, a boyish breathiness in my flight to what I mistook for the front lines of the culture wars, like Byron sitting for a portrait in Albanian dress. I was aware of a sense, even then, that with every gallery I visited in Europe, from Munich's Alte Pinakothek and the London Met to more offbeat collections like the Ostwall or later Edinburgh's Modern One, I wanted to share the experience with Cindy and Andy. I feel the same today. It's a physical sensation, a projection of something solid and sought for just over my shoulder. I always want to ask them both, is this shit? Or am I ignorant? Is this one of the real ones? Have I judged right? And most of all, do you feel what I feel? As I grew older, learned more, mellowed, this feeling became less about the absence of affirmation and instruction in art from the only two people in my life positioned to provide those things, and more about a dialogue perpetually unborn. Instead of Andy's and Cindy's answers to questions, I started to perceive in flashes a vast, ghostly current, free-flowing conversations, disagreements even, the sort of dialogue that forms the moving, liquid core of an artistic community. Instead, I flowed alone, too often unfeeling and unfinished, over years of experiences in art. I didn't know, in 2014, for example, that construction of the original Museum Ostwall had begun in 1947, using salvaged materials from a much older art and historical museum that had been destroyed in the war. Ostwall held its first exhibition in 1949, making it one of Germany's first post-war galleries of contemporary art. And it was founded with a focus on Entartet Kunst, degenerate art, modern work that the Nazi regime had deemed unmanly, un-German, and in many cases simply Jewish. My final assessment of the spoons, the Alles ist Kunst, even the filleted microphone, might have softened in the light of that historical understanding. I didn't know that, over a Schlesisch grandmother's spirals, I had passed unsparing judgment on the work of Ben Vaudier and Joseph Beuys, artists inspired, like Andy, by Dada, by John Cage, by the politics of their time. Artists who were instrumental in shaping Fluxus, a nuclear relative to Andy's intermedia and Cindy's practice of collage. Artists who were part of a rich and complicated dialogue with my aunt and uncle, an aunt and uncle who would become a dialogue of echoes and projections within me. I didn't know this. It would be several more years before I learned that in touring the Ostwall's exhibits, I was doing more than passing over my aunt and uncle's influences. I was also walking, literally, in Andy's footsteps.
there's no light.
Window, I tell everyone of my outgrown heart. Open your life wide and shut me inside it. This evening you found this odd little way. With you, I leave this place. I've never seen or lived it anyway. With you, I leave it. I live it with you. Not even noon can catch us. I live it with you. I say it over. I tell you of the want. I leave with you. I with you.